coming for the first in the series of learning it. Let's learn it together in honor of Shabbat UK. We thought this year we would do some learning about Shabbat. Don't know if everybody got the mailing yet, because unfortunately there was a bit of a thing with the Mahadash and didn't come until Monday.
Where'd you go?
So some people haven't had it yet. So thank you for coming, because some of you got it obviously ahead of the mailing. This is, as I said, the first of two performances for the first session, Shabbat, the Ultimate Treasure. And what we're going to be doing over this session, and the repeat session on Monday, and then again in 2 weeks' time, and the repeat session, I think on the Thursday after that, is looking at Shabbat from a philosophical perspective, not necessarily from a halachic perspective. We obviously will be touching on some areas of halacha, but it will mainly be philosophical, to understand what Shabbat is, what Shabbat represents, and why we should all have Shabbat in our lives. So we'll start off with the introduction, and I think it'll sort of give you a little feeling of what you're about to experience for the next hour.
Protest. The people are here and they are loud. They want Chala. They want Cholent. They want Shabbat. Already, they've been removing light bulbs. They've been turning off cell phones, and at least 3 cars have been disabled for at least 25 hours. Let's hear from some of the protesters. Hi, Nancy Houseman, what's your name and what are you protesting for?
I'm Moshe Goldberg, and we are protesting for Shabbat. We, 0.01%, we want Shabbat!
What's your name and what are you protesting?
I'm Charlene, and I'm protesting that they can't take Shabbat away from us. We'll always want Shabbat.
Excuse me. I'm speaking now to the leader of the movement, Alex Neufeld. Tell me, Alex, why are you protesting?
We want more Shabbat.
Hi, I'm speaking to another child involved in the protest. Tell me, what's your name?
My name is Prince. We love Janice and wish to us every day.
I'm Izzy Hausman, and that's in here from the Occupy Shabbat protest. We now go to Ron Burgundy with the sports. Stay classy,
Okay, so over the next hour we're going to be looking at why these people and many other people feel so passionately and so strongly about Shabbat. That comes from a special organization at Shabbat.com. So what we're going to see is that, this is Torah Live's presentation, as I said. An overview of what we're going to be looking at over the next hour is the reasons for Shabbat, why it's a source of blessing, and also how it gives us peace of mind. And the interesting thing is that Shabbat, we all know, is the holiest of the days, and yet the Torah, or somewhere it is referred to as a treasure. Does anyone know who refers to it as a treasure? Who first called Shabbat a treasure? So the sages tell us that actually God refers to it as a treasure. God told Moses, I have a wonderful gift, a treasure in my storehouse, that I would like to give to the Jews. Go and tell them. And of course the gift is Shabbat. And this is a gift that we all need, and we don't realize how much we need it. We need it because we're living in times where everything, as we know, is busier than ever. People are rushing around. They're texting very fast. They're finding it difficult to schedule their diaries because everything's so busy. People are actually finding it hard to turn off.
Very, very difficult to unplug. I work in the media. Usually carry 2 or 3 phones on me. I have a 2-year-old, she has an iPhone. When I do try to get away from technology, it usually involves literally running away from it, engaging in something where I physically cannot get to my phone, or a computer, or a Kindle, or an iPad.
Okay. It also makes it harder to have genuine relationships with people. Some of you may have seen this was out a couple of years ago, but it's very poignant. That was a campaign for people.
How can being busy shorten my life?
You get anxious, you get agitated, you get fretful, and with that, your blood pressure goes up, your heart rate goes up, so your risk for heart attack, stroke goes up, inflammation gets worse, your risk for cancer gets worse, catch colds, flus, it's just bad for your health altogether.
And it can lead to accidents. We get the picture. So, we're overstretched, we're overbooked, and it's just getting worse. And so today, more than ever, we need Shabbat in our lives, which is interesting because Shabbat is obviously such an ancient idea, and yet now, in the 21st century, is probably a time that Shabbat has never been more relevant. Now, all Jews, whether they be religious or not, know and understand the importance of Shabbat. But really, many people still don't understand what Shabbat is. And what I mean by that is, of course we know it's the fourth commandment, of course we know it's the seventh day, but they don't understand the holy value of what Shabbat can bring to them. And even perhaps the most religious of people can live through a Shabbat and not necessarily experience what the true meaning of Shabbat is. The sages tell us that God says, God says, He said to Moshe, I have a present for you, it's hidden in my storehouse, and I want to let you know. But the Gemara asks, we have a rule, you don't have to tell someone about a gift they're about to receive. In fact, you shouldn't tell somebody about a gift they're about to receive. And this is learned from the end of the parsha, where we read that God did not tell Moshe that his face was shining. So the question is, why did God tell Moshe about Shabbat? If you're not allowed to tell somebody about the gift that they're about to receive, and the Gemara answers and says, it depends on whether the recipient will eventually find out what the gift is. If they'll definitely find out what it is, then you're not allowed to tell them. But if they're not necessarily going to find out what it is, then you're going to tell them.
But presumably Moshe knew about Adam and about the seventh day.
You're 100% right. But what we see here is that Shabbat is a lot deeper than all that. And that's exactly it. That although it is, we said, the seventh day and Adam and creation, etc., it is much deeper than that. We may have heard about Shabbat. We may know some of the technicalities of Shabbat. But when it comes down to it, do we really understand the pleasure and the high levels and the closeness to God and the holiness, etc., that Shabbat brings? And that really, when we look at it, we don't really understand much at all. There's a saying which we say in Pirkei Avot, Ethics of the Fathers, 1 hour of spiritual bliss in the world to come is greater than all of this world. What does that mean exactly? Well, if you can imagine that on one side of the scale is 1 hour in the world to come, and on the other side of the scale is all the great, lovely, pleasurable things you can think of in this world. Chocolate, ice cream, money, family, skiing holidays, I suppose, fast cars, whatever it is. Now add to that, and think of all that pleasure that you've had from the day you were born until this present day. Now add to that all the pleasure for the rest of your life. Add to that all the pleasure of all the people alive in the world today. And add to that all the pleasure of all the people who ever lived in this world. And that pleasure which they and us and you and all of us have had and will have is the same as 1 hour of pleasure, according to our sages, in the world to come. And our sages said that the Jewish people wanted to feel and wanted to understand what the world to come would be like. And God tells them that you want to know what the world to come is going to be like, it is going to be Me'en Olam Haba Yom Shabbat Menucha. You might have heard that expression before. A taste of the world to come, that is Shabbat. So in effect, what we are saying is that Shabbat has the potential, understanding and truly reflecting on a proper Shabbat, has the potential of experiencing all the greatness that ever has been, all the lovely experiences that ever has been, and indeed ever will be. And that is really the power of Shabbat. But in order to prepare for Shabbat, a person has to be ready both physically and mentally, and he has to learn about Shabbat and accept upon himself Shabbat in the appropriate way. And unless a person can do this, as I said, a person can be observant throughout his whole life and still never really, truly appreciate what his Shabbat is all about. He'll be like a poor person who is suffering extreme poverty and then on his deathbed finds out that there was a box of gold hidden away in his room. And he'll think about the terrible thing, how he experienced his whole life, all those hardships, and he had the gold right next to him. Say our sages, that is exactly the way Shabbat should be looked upon by us. We have this wonderful gift, and yet there are many people who think to themselves they don't need to act more on it because they already understand it. But nobody truly understands the power of this gift. And in the coming series today and next week, in 2 weeks' time, we're going to understand exactly the place Shabbat should have in our life. So let's look at the reasons why there is a Shabbat. Anyone know who that man is? You've heard of him, all of you. That is Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch. Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch lived in Germany in the mid-19th century, and he really set up a lot of what the way that our day schools teach now. This concept of having Jewish studies as well as Chol was unheard of until then. It was either you went to a cheder system where basically you learned Torah all day, maybe did a little bit of mathematics or something like that, or you went to a secular school and you didn't have. He came up with the idea, and basically him and Rabbi Hildesheimer, with all the ideas of what we have as for Jewish schools nowadays, the same model is being used all around the world. And Rabbi Hirsch really was, I would say, what we would call nowadays modern Orthodox. He used the modern world to be able to combat, with Torah, to be able to combat the growing rise of reform and liberal views which were gaining power in Germany in the 19th century. And he wrote many books, and one of them is a sort of explanation of the Torah, and also he tried to understand the mitzvot and why we do them. And he says the man is the crown of creation. Man is different from the animal kingdom. And animals use the world as it is, and they cannot manipulate it in order to create new objects. And this idea is explained by Diane Grunfeld, who translated Rabbi Hirsch's words from German into English. He says, man is master over the world. Man is able to melt down and reshape materials and form magnificent structures. He's able to invent phenomenal creations that will take him out into space and to design systems of communications that will bring mankind together. This can easily lead man to think that he alone is creator of the world. Man's great powers over nature that enable him to control it, harness its energies, and mold it to his will. And these very powers make it easy for him to think of himself as the creator, answerable to nobody else but himself. So God built into the system a method that will always ensure that man will not lose sight of his role in the world. And what is that? We have to stop one day from exercising our ability to create, from our ability to be able to produce, and that of course is Shabbat. And by resting on Shabbat, we're taking a step back and recognizing God for the powers that He has and the lack of power that we have. It's as if the boss has, as it were, closed the plant for Shabbat. He declares the machinery and all the tools that they're off limits, and that refraining from this work and prohibiting the creative activities testify that God Himself is master of the world and that we are all but His humble servants. And it stops us from saying, I'm in charge. So what about the source of blessing? We say, Vayevarach Elokim es Yom HaShvi'i vayikadesh oso. We say this in Kiddush. God blessed the seventh day and made it holy. Not only does God bless the seventh day, but it is also the source of blessing. The source that, I don't know why to go sun down there, but the source of the blessing from all the other days of the week. And the actual commandment, interestingly enough, for Shabbat is found in 7 different portions in the Torah to allude to all 7 days of the week. That each one of the 7 days of the week sort of depend upon the goodness that they receive from Shabbat. And these are to show you the 7 different portions in the Torah with which they come. Work. So Rabbi Hirsch also answered several very basic questions about work we're forbidden to do on Shabbat. And that is really one of the big bones of contention about people on Shabbat. People often say, well, Rabbi, how can it be that the most common question which they ask is turning on a light? Turning on a light is not really a lot of hard work. It's a flick of the finger. And yet that is forbidden on Shabbat. And what do we mean when we talk about Shabbat being the day of rest? If I'm not tired, do I then have to still rest on Shabbat? Or if I'm not tired, do I not have to keep Shabbat? And what does it mean that Hashem rested from all the work? These are all questions we find difficult to understand. Hashem doesn't get tired. For Hashem to create the world is the same as him creating 1 grain of sand. So what exactly does this all mean? Another question is walking to shul. Why is walking allowed, but driving, which is a lot less energetic, is not allowed? There's a great story, if you've read The Gift of Shabbat, which I recommended to you, Senator Joe Lieberman, who almost became Vice President of the United States of America. His book starts off that he was walking in the rain with his police escort back home on a Friday. He was needed to stay in the state Senate to discuss some policy that they were doing, and he walked up and it was pouring in rain, and the guy sort of said to him, like, why don't we just get in the car? The car went alongside them, and a policeman had to walk with him, and they were both getting wet. He said, this is my Sabbath, this is what I do, and you can't do much about it. So how can we understand the stringencies of Shabbat? There's a very interesting law on Shabbat about a fly in a glass of milk. And there's a concept, which I don't know too much detail about, which is called borer, which is separating on Shabbat. Taking a fly out of a glass of milk on Shabbat is more problematic than eating a pig or burning a Sefer Torah or stealing or even burning down a shul. And yet taking a fly out of a glass of milk, that seems to be something which the rabbis carrying a handkerchief outside on Shabbat is problematic. And it doesn't seem to make sense. So Rabbi Shimshon Pincus relates how there was once a wealthy fellow who was talking to him about the laws of Shabbat. And he turned to him, he wasn't religious. He said, I want to ask you a question, Rabbi. And he said, okay. He said, is it true that there's a story in the Torah about the fellow who gathered some sticks on Shabbat? It's there in the Torah. That is Salafchad. If we know the story about the daughters of Salafchad, who came and said that their father died and that they didn't have any portion in the land because he only had daughters, and they were concerned where his portion was going to go to. Why did he die? He was gathering sticks on Shabbat. And this fellow said to Rabbi Pincus, what did this guy do already? He didn't kill anyone, he didn't steal from anybody, and yet he was taken out and he was killed for breaking Shabbat. How can this be? And perhaps the answer given by Rabbi Hirsch is the answer. That any act, however small, which demonstrates man's mastery of nature, is a malacha, is one of the 39 laws, that with 39 acts of work that we can't do on Shabbat. And that could be work of striking a light, it could be work of washing clothes, or building a house. And with this we can see that when people ask, turning on an electric light is not much work, just because it is not much work for us to do nowadays, does not mean that it is not problematic on Shabbat. And therefore,
so I was going to say,
yeah,
following that logic then,
yeah,
which I totally understand,
yeah,
you have these what are called kosher lamps.
Yeah,
that
correct.
You can have that you can,
Correct.
as I understand, twist them.
Twist them, and they stay,
So
they're on.
how can that not be malacha?
Okay, so that's an interesting point. Well, that is not malacha because that is, the light is still there. What the lamp does, it just is really just almost like a shade away from the light. So you're just turning this thing, and I think that the whole great thing about it is that it doesn't overheat and it doesn't cause fires or whatever it is. But the bottom line is that you're not turning the light. The light remains on from what I can see. You're not turning it off. You're just shielding the light. And these are. I mean, this is a very good question. But what we can see is that if somebody were to do an act of creation on Shabbat, they are in effect ultimately denying God's mastery over the world. And that's why we say, would you believe, that someone who desecrates Shabbat knowingly, it could be comparable to idol worship. And you say to yourself, idol worship? The person's not bowing down to an idol. It sounds almost ridiculous. But the fact is that if you're denying God's sovereignty of the world, then you have to be questioning who you're worshiping. And on the other hand, when a young Jewish girl refrains from plucking a little flower, it's a greater tribute to God than perhaps all the greatest prayers of all the greatest poets and all the greatest philosophers in Jewish history. So in that sort of way, we have to look at it. Just a quote from Rabbi Hirsch again. He says, even the smallest work done on Shabbat is a denial of the fact that God is the creator and master of the world. It's an arrogant setting up of man as his own master. It is a denial of the whole task of the Jew as man and as Israelite, which is nothing but the management of the earth according to the will of God. And it therefore incurs death and excision from the congregation of Israel. On the other hand, every refraining from work on Shabbat is in itself a positive expression of the fact that God is creator and master of the world, and that he is the one who has set man in his place, that he is the lawgiver of life, and it is a proclamation and acknowledgement of our task as men and Israelites. So we understand that the reason for Shabbat, the reason why it is a source of blessing to the whole week, as well as what the definition of the work is. Let us now look more closely at the source where we derive the malachot from. So where do we get the ideas of not working on Shabbat from? And they actually come from the Beit HaMikdash. The Torah, when it talks about building the Mishkan, which is the portable sanctuary, which was carried through the wilderness and then brought into the land of Israel prior to the building of the first temple, took with it, next to it, the laws of Shabbat. And the rabbis say, do you know why the laws of Shabbat are placed next to the laws of the building of the sanctuary? It is to teach us that even for the building of the sanctuary, we had to stop working on Shabbat. Now you might think to yourself, it's the building of the sanctuary, building a house of God. No, even that had to stop on Shabbat. And there were 39 categories which involved various materials, weaving, sewing, whatever was needed in order to create the materials, and in order to cut the materials and dye the materials and hang the materials. Anything which was used in the building of the Mishkan, building of the sanctuary, was stopped for Shabbat. And it is these laws from where we gather all the laws that we have with things which are forbidden on Shabbat. So anything that you can think which is forbidden on Shabbat, it all stems from these 39 principles. We have what's called the 39 Al-Malachot, the 39 main principles, and from them we have subcategories to understand. So things like not writing on Shabbat, not using money on Shabbat, not using electricity on Shabbat. All these things stem ultimately from the building of the Mishkan. When God created the world, he wanted his presence to be specifically in the world. But then Adam and Eve, and we had the sins of Cain, and we had the sins of Sodom, and God took his presence away little by little. And then it came back when God pronounced the Torah to the children of Israel. And then it was taken away again when the children of Israel served the golden calf. And it was only brought back again by the building of the Mishkan. So what we're seeing is that the Mishkan, the tabernacle, the Beit HaMikdash, whatever it was, is a sort of miniature world which enabled God's presence to rest upon us. And therefore, to refrain from work on Shabbat is the very same work that God, as it were, refrained from when he created the world, as we spoke about back in the Garden of Eden. So on the Shabbat table, we have little signs about, or on Shabbat itself, we have little signs about the Mishkan and about the sanctuary. So first of all, of course, the table is called a Shulchan in Ivrit. And there was, in the background there, the Shulchan in the temple. That was in the Holies, which was just in the room preceding the Holy of Holies. And on that was placed the 12 showbread. And we treat our table in a very respectful way on Shabbat, and that's one way we represent the Beit HaMikdash on Shabbat. Another way of remembering it, of course, is the Shabbat candles, which represent the menorah, which of course was lit in the temple. We have the chalot, which represent the lechem hapanim. Those are loaves of bread, would you believe, which were the 12 loaves of bread which appeared on the shulchan from week to week, stayed there, staying fresh the whole week, and were eaten on the following Friday. And that's the reason why we have it. By the way, if you've ever get a chance in Jerusalem, just at the top of the stairs coming up from the Kotel on the left-hand side, the one near the bus stops, just when you get to the top of those stairs, there's an amazing exhibition of the temple artifact. You went to it? Okay? So, okay, and they've got exactly what the temple looked like inside, all the various utensils in the temple, and it's fascinating. The sacrifices which are offered on Shabbat, I suppose us praying on Shabbat would be a way of understanding our connection to that. Singing songs, the songs of the Levian, the Levites sang songs. There's a custom to sing songs on Shabbat. Beautiful Shabbat clothes that we wear, again representing that the Kohen used to wear the special big day kahuna, the special priestly garments. Washing before Shabbat, I suppose washing on Shabbat, washing before prayer. Again, washing the hands and the feet, in which the Kohen used to do when he used to do his service in the temple. And eating from God's table. That if we elevate our table, you know, the one thing which I don't know why always gets to me in school is when boys sit on desks. Sorry, Paul. But the one thing that always gets to me is when boys sit on desks. This is for a useful purpose. But why is it get to me? Because our table, certainly the table we eat from, is called the Mizbeach. It's our altar. It's the way we elevate what we eat. You know, in Judaism we always say that we don't live to eat. We eat to live. And that we're eating in order to be able to serve God, etc. We're elevating our Shabbat meal, and we're not eating gluttonously. We're eating in order to celebrate Shabbat in the proper way. And by elevating our table, it becomes like eating kosher, eating from the holy food, which was offered up on the altar in the temple, and then eaten by us. For example, you can think of the Korban Pesach, which was a sacrifice which was offered up, and yet at the same time, of course, was eaten by each person in Israel. And then the last one is fear. Mora Mikdash. So what does that mean, fear? We say that the Beit HaMikdash was the source of all good in the world. That Shlomo HaMelech, when he built the Beit HaMikdash, of course we know, but he had the ability to plant and grow flowers, brought down in the Midrash, in Israel, which normally could not be found in the land of Israel. And how did he manage to do this? He goes, because the Beit HaMikdash was the source of all goodness, and that spread out to Jerusalem, and that spread out to Israel, and beyond. And Shabbat, we say, is exactly the same thing. Shabbat is basically the source of all things that are good in the world. And if you think about it, every Shabbat which precedes a major Yom Tov is given a special name. The two that obviously spring to mind are Shabbat Shuvah, which is the Shabbat preceding Yom Kippur, right, which is going to be the day after Rosh Hashanah this year, and Shabbat HaGadol, which is the Shabbat preceding Pesach. But we also, when you think about it, have other Shabbatot where we honor the Shabbat preceding an event. For example, certainly in Ashkenazi custom, that the Shabbat before a groom gets married, he has his Ofruf, he has his Shabbat Chatan, where he gets called up. Then there's a custom that on the Friday night after a baby boy is born, prior to his Brit, we have something called the Shalom Zachor, which is also his Shabbat of welcoming him into the world. And we also have the custom, which is in 99.9% of shuls, that on the Shabbat before a yard site, people come to shul and they get called up to the Torah, and they might even want to say Kaddish on that Shabbat. And what we're showing by that is that the Shabbat itself has an impact on events which are going to follow that week, whether it be Pesach, whether it be Yom Kippur, whether it be the baby's brit, whether it be the person's wedding, or whether it be the person's yahrzeit. So Shabbat is the source of all things that are good in time. The Beit HaMikdash, after Shlomo HaMelech built the Beit HaMikdash, was, as I said, able to grow plants which could not normally grow in the land of Israel. Why? Because the goodness which came from the temple spread to Jerusalem and spread throughout the land of Israel. And what we're seeing is that Shabbat is to time, if you want, what the Beit HaMikdash is to space. That it has that ability of goodness to be able to spread it out and to allow it to grow way beyond the borders of where you would think. And that is the connection between Shabbat and the Beit HaMikdash. So abstaining from work. We have the pasuk in the Torah, Vayevarach Elokim et Yom HaShvi'i Vayikadesh Oto, which we said before. Okay, so we said that God blessed it and He sanctified it. What does it mean that He blessed it and sanctified it? So there's a very interesting Rashi where he says that what that means is Vayevarach Vayikadesh. Why the double expression? I can't remember if he gives the English translation. He says, what is that double expression? Bercho b'man. He blessed it through with a man. What does that mean? Shekol yemot haShabbat haya yored lahem omer legulgolat uvashishi lechem mishnah. We know famously with the manna that a portion came per head every single day of the week, but on Friday, the double portion, which of course is one of the reasons why we have the double chalot on the Friday night table and the Shabbat table. So he said this pasuk, when it says that God blessed and God sanctified, it's in relation to the manna. Now you might say to yourself, hold on, the manna fell for 40 years out of the whole of history. What does that all mean? And I think what it is, it's teaching us a very valuable lesson. And the valuable lesson is as follows. That a person should realize that he'll never lose out financially by not working on Shabbat. Shabbat is a great measuring rod of bitachon, of faith in God, the touchstone of our belief that a higher force rules and guides our lives. He who knows that his livelihood depends not on men, nor on nature, nor on economic forces, but on God Himself, knows also that no real gain can come from work done in defiance of God on the Sabbath. How often do you see one see the imagined gains from such soul-destroying work cancelled by unexpected losses in other fields? And on the other hand, the person who stands firm and refuses to betray the Sabbath for the prospects of apparent monetary gain will often find that loss was, after all, only illusory. And we know that we could probably even think of famous examples in our own history. The Jews who came certainly to America at the beginning of the 20th century, and I've spoken about this before, were often found it very difficult to find work which did not involve working on Saturdays. And often they had to quit their jobs on Friday and then find a new job on the Sunday. And my grandfather, who thankfully made it for himself after he came over from Lithuania to New York, made a policy when he got there of only hiring Shomer Shabbat people because he wanted to give them that extra benefit when they came, that they were able to enjoy not working on Shabbat. And there's a great story about 18th century Amsterdam about Jacob de Vries. Jacob de Vries was a jewelry merchant in 18th century Amsterdam, and he had good relationships with some of the hoi polloi in Amsterdam, in particular with a certain duke who used to be one of his best customers. And Jacob was a religious Jew, and it was well known that not only would he never work on Shabbat, he would never even talk about work on Shabbat. And one Shabbat morning he was sitting with his family at Kiddush, and a royal messenger came with 2 guards. And the message said that the Duke wanted to see him immediately, that he had to appear before the Duke within an hour and bring a large selection of choice gems, that he wanted to do some business and he wanted to do it now. And Jacob said to the guard with his humblest respect to the Duke, it's his Sabbath and he never worked on Sabbath, and the Duke knows that, and could he tell the Duke that he'll gladly come right after Shabbat, but he is not going to come on Shabbat. And that the guard went away, and other guards came back throughout the day. He sat down at his Shabbat table and tried to carry on. Every so often, they would come and he would politely refuse. And he spent Shabbat afternoon learning with his son. Again, there were knocks at the door telling him to come, that if he did not come, that all relationships between the Duke and Jacob de Vries would be cut off, that he would not buy from him anymore. And that he said, no, I'm sorry, I have loyalty to the Duke, but I have a higher loyalty to God. I promise I will appear right after Shabbat, but I am not going to break Shabbat in order to go see the Duke. And the story continues that after Shabbat, he went to see him, and he was greeted with a big smile and a big hug. And he said, I'm so glad to see you, Jacob. And he said, what? He goes, you earned me 10,000 gilda today. He said, what do you mean? He said, I had a bet with another Duke who said that Jews love a good prophet and Jews would always come and do anything for a good prophet. And I said, no, my merchant, my jewelry supplier would never do that. He would never desecrate the Sabbath. He said, I bet you 10,000 gilda. And even though I kept sending you more and more guards and more orders to come, you still refused to come. And for that, I thank you very much for living up to my expectations. It's a beautiful story. There's another great story about Baron Rothschild, who from the famous banker family. Rothschild again was a proud Jew. His faith in God was legendary. And one Shabbat, a company which was going bust, they really wanted to sell, and they thought they'd be a good purchaser for it, and they came with an offer on a telex machine of $2.5 million, but he was making Kiddush Friday night at the time, and he did not have any interest in looking at it. So they took his word, the fact that he didn't reply to it, as that he wasn't happy with the offer. So they lowered the offer to about $2.1 million. And again, he did not reply. And then a third one came through during Shabbat for $1.7 million. And the story goes that he called them after Shabbat and said, fine, I'll settle with you on the $1.7 million. And so he got it at a third of the price off, because he didn't answer on Shabbat. And I don't think the 2.5 was too ridiculous a price either. But because he kept Shabbat, he was able to profit, as it were, from Shabbat without doing any work. And that's again a way that people think that if they don't work on Shabbat, they're going to lose out. On the contrary, by not working on Shabbat, Baron Rothschild gained quite tremendously there. So peace of mind. The pasuk tells us, the verse tells us, Sheishet yamim ta'avod v'asisa kol malachtecha. We say this in Kiddush. 6 days you shall work and do all your work, which is very, very strange. It is not possible to do all your work in 6 days, I suppose. What does it mean? There's always more work to do. So what can it possibly mean that you shall do all your work? And I think the answer is that when Shabbat comes, we have to treat it as if all our work is done. That's the way the quote is. When Shabbat comes, it should be in your eyes as if all your work is done. In other words, you should not just want to physically stop working. It's also a time for mentally switching off. And we saw those things before about switching off your phone, switching off your computer. That's really what Shabbat about. It's not just about physically. So a person who can abstain from work and think that he's keeping Shabbat and doing, if he is thinking about his work, and he's thinking about his investments, and he's thinking about everything to do with his weekday on Shabbat, he hasn't respected Shabbat in the correct way. Because it says, 6 days shall you work and complete all your work. I.e., 6 days is a time to think about work, and on the 7th day, you shut it all out. And because you can ask, how is it possible that somebody who is working all week, and they're working, I don't know, on a multi-million-pound merger, and it's consuming every single thought that they have all day, every single day of the week, think to themselves, all right, yeah, now Shabbat comes. They might keep Shabbat. They might even, they won't go to work on Shabbat. They won't even take a mobile phone call on Shabbat. They won't look at their computer and their emails, etc. on Shabbat. But if they're preoccupied with everything that deal is all about, and thinking about after Shabbat all the emails they're going to have to send out, and all the papers they're going to have to look through, the contract just to make sure the deal is going to go through, then that is not particularly a positive way of honoring Shabbat. What we have to do is, on Shabbat, it all has to, as it were, run off the top of our head, not get soaked in there. And what does that mean is that we have to be as if all our work is done. The Torah does not want us to play mind games with our thinking, to pretend I'm finished when I know I haven't. And so listen to this. The whole world, we have to admit, only continues to turn, every single aspect of it happens because of God. So what is man's role in it? Man is not actually contributing much. Focus on the next text there. Man's test is to overcome the hidden ways. It's from Mesilei Sharim, from Moshe Chaim Zato, in which Hashem runs the world, and to recognize the truth that God alone rules, has always ruled, and will always rule every facet of creation. To come to realization that all the hishtadlut, all the effort that man does is just that, effort. It's an exercise of going through the motions to fulfill the divine decree. But that's all that it is. Going through the motions so that eventually when God's blessing arrives, it will appear to all like it came through natural means. So what we're saying is that all the work that we do, all the effort we expend during the week is only about exactly that, making the effort. Ultimately, God has decreed what we will earn, how much we will earn, and how we will earn it. Of course, everybody has to do the hishtadlut. You cannot sit on your tuchas and say, God will provide. Everybody has to make that effort. But our assignment in the world is exactly that, to make the effort, but to recognize that ultimately, this is not result-oriented. God will decide how much ultimately I will get. And I think if we all understand that the work which we do, and the work which throughout the week, ultimately is recognizing all comes from God's hand, that He alone will determine our results of what we will get, then all we have to do is to work during the week and keep this all in mind and understand that it's possible to reach this space of tranquility, of peace on Shabbat, where I can feel nothing to fret about, because I know that on Shabbat I don't have to think about the work during the week. I've done all I need to do. I'm working during the week because God wants me to work during the week. So therefore I can feel in some way when Shabbat comes that my work is over, that I don't have to worry about that email, I don't have to worry about reviewing that contract.
So just out of interest, why is spiritual study, which is intellectually still using the mind cells, the brain cells, why is that permitted when you're supposed to be switching off? And
so you're switching off from a physical, I suppose, a materialistic way. But spiritually, you're allowed to grow. Why would you not be allowed to? I don't think.
I don't know. I mean, if I'm looking at the Chumash and I'm trying to understand what's being said there, intellectually, I'm going through a process which is quite spiritual. It's also quite mentally challenging. Okay, so I don't think we're saying you have to switch your brain off on Shabbat. What we're saying is you have to switch your brain off from your concerns of the weekday, i.e. from your material concerns and that sort of thing. Of course you can expand your brain on Shabbat. That's probably the best time of the week to do so, for the exact reason what we're saying here, that you switch off from everything else and now you focus exclusively on God and on the Torah, etc. So the question is, we were saying that it's no longer how can I be expected not to think about work on Shabbat. It should be on the contrary. The question is why, if God is all powerful and He runs the universe, do I need to think about anything and do anything during the week? To which we have an answer that there's an obligation that we have to do. We have to make that effort. But during a time that this obligation isn't on me, why should I worry about something that doesn't really, as it were, concern me? So when a person merits reaching the state of mind, he experiences Shabbat on a completely different level. He becomes calmer, he becomes a much happier person, a more peaceful person, not just on Shabbat, but probably during the whole week. And his week activities of course he does them, but they sort of do not become an integral part of who he is. And he realizes I don't have to grab every single opportunity. Of course, that person has to make the effort to make a livelihood, but at the same time, it doesn't have to become part of who they are. By accepting that God is in control of everything that goes on, and that we don't have control at all, that God is completely in charge, you're freeing yourself from that busyness of running around all week and basically saying that ultimately what I will achieve, it will be thanks to God. And that's really what Shabbat is all about. And in conclusion, therefore, for this session, that if it seems that in today's society, the norm is to try and keep busy, to try and look busy, to try and always act in a busy way. But if we're not careful, we'll get so busy
we'll miss taking the time to think, we'll miss taking the time to feel, and worst of all, we won't be in touch with ourselves. So, jumping up from the table to check the email that just pinged or to answer the mobile phone, rushing off to your next appointment, you think to yourself, wow, this is what busy people do. Shabbat is a time, as we were just saying, it's a time for menuchat nefesh, it's a time for spiritual relaxation, okay? Which literally means the rest of the soul. And that our minds are totally focused on the divine, it's totally focused on the present, on whatever and wherever we are at that moment. It's a feeling of belonging, of being exactly where we want to be. If you imagine yourself sitting on a beach sipping a pina colada on a very hot beach, you don't dream of being somewhere else. You dream of exactly being there. Your whole focus, your whole world is turned inwards, and you revel in that moment. You're right there, you're fully engaged. And that is exactly what menuchat hanefesh is, relaxation of the soul. And that is what a person can experience every single Shabbat in the comfort of their own home. Menuchat hanefesh is not laziness. Rather, it's a state of mind, a deep and fulfilling feeling that you have reached the place that you want to be and you're not looking to go elsewhere. And experiencing that feeling is exactly as we said before, Me'ein olam haba is a feeling of a taste of the world to come, is a feeling of the Garden of Eden. And that, as we started off by saying, Shabbat is the ultimate treasure. I hope that's given us some sort of insight into understanding a little bit about what Shabbat really is about. I hope you're giving us a greater appreciation of what Shabbat is. Thank you for coming. The next in this course will be in 2 weeks' time tonight. If you want to come to the repeat performance or tell your friends, it's at 1 o'clock this coming Monday. Good night.